Oh, sorry about that. All right, go ahead, Mrittika.
Okay, welcome everyone to our first webinar of the year. And I am so grateful and honored to be with you. And I'm really grateful that you could spend this afternoon with me, where I'll be sharing my work, my life, both of which are intimately related. Annette gave me a wonderful introduction, but I'm just going to go over it a little bit um, to, okay. So I've been a researcher, analyst, writer, in editor in academic institutions, nonprofits, humanitarian agencies, media and publishing for the past 20 years. The other thing to know about me is that I'm mom to a 15-year-old son and a daughter who died in 2013 at 3 months old, and my son was 3 at the time. My family and I participated in Good Grief from 2014 until 17, and my son came back to the program from 2022 until 2024. I was born and raised in India. I still have family there. I have also lived in Egypt. I have 2 master's degrees and a PhD. One of my master's and the PhD is in communication studies. I have also published extensively in newspapers, magazines, and websites. And I make jewelry and have a line called Earth Strings. So, getting into some of what brought me here, who I am as a person, as well as how my personal and professional stories merge. My interest in mental health peaked during a research internship with the World Health Organization in Cairo when I was living in Egypt. And in the US, my master's in communication from Ohio State University, I studied interpersonal support for survivors of domestic abuse. I've always been interested in support as a social process and a communication process. I pursued my PhD with research interest in interpersonal support in crisis, so that domestic abuse that topic kind of widened to include other types of crises. My daughter died when I was in my second year of my PhD, and after her death, my personal perspective and my professional focus completely shifted. It was almost like my entire life had been turned upside down. So I live Good Grief's mission. It's something that I thrive on, and I'm a very strong advocate for grief research and grief support, which is something that I am blessed to do in this fantastic organization. And my personal life inspires my work, but my expertise and skills um, informs Good Grief's research and evidence. So essentially, all the research that goes into our curriculum and all the great work that Annette was mentioning before is it mostly comes from my work, and not my work like, but I do all the research that informs our program. And then I also gather evidence that our program is working. So I'm also the head of evaluation. So today I wanted to kind of go over a full circle of the psychological background of communication, and then the process of communication, and then the features of messages that make a particular message helpful or unhelpful in when you're trying to support a griever, whether you're supporting them in a personal capacity or a professional capacity. So at the end of the webinar, you should be able to identify a key psychological concept that affects a grieving person's need for support and the way they interpret it. You should be able to explore how multiple and mismatched communication goals can impact the support process. And we'll identify high levels of empathic communication and what to avoid when offering support to a bereaved individual. I will be taking questions at the end, and Annette is monitoring the chat, so please feel free to put in your questions as and when they come up for you. And also, if you need to stop me in the middle or something, please let Annette know. If you want me to repeat something, that kind of stuff. So we know that support has a very strong positive impact. It works, right? It helps people, experiencing stressful situations cope better. It has been seen to have a positive impact on mental health. It can ease emotional distress. It can reduce feelings of isolation. It can increase self-efficacy. It can motivate positive health behaviors. However, despite the benefits of support, there is also ample research that says that it can be a challenge for someone experiencing a challenging situation. It can be a bit of an issue, a bit of a struggle to seek support. And that is something that we are going to first uncover. What prevents, or what is it that people are experiencing even when they are in a problematic situation? So all these, factors, privacy concerns, reluctance to self-disclose details of that challenge, low self-esteem, perceived lack of support, have all been studied as factors that influence why people have trouble seeking support. But today, I'm going to dig deeper into a concept that we may intuitively feel, but may have a hard time identifying. Um, and it plays a huge role in the support process, especially in grief. But first, let's think about what grief does. So grief has a significant impact on the cognitive, emotional, and behavioral functioning of the griever. Aside from it's a huge tragedy. It is, but it also affects the person's day-to-day functioning, which it can make someone feel incompetent, not in control, and even out of control. So we often hear, the words, I'm numb, I'm in a fog, my mind is in I'm blanking out. It's surreal, things like that. So I cannot stop crying. I feel like I'm completely, I'm a different person. So it creates a friction between one's self-awareness as a capable person and the diminished way that they think they're functioning at that point because of their grief. And this is especially true in a culture like ours, where people pride themselves on being independent and self-sufficient. So that is what grief is creating for a person, is that friction between their awareness or their self-esteem or their self, awareness, and the way they are suddenly seeing themselves to be like. So that brings us to the concept of face. So face is something that has been studied from the 1960s in social psychology. Um, it is our social identity. All of us have it, and we are very protective of our face. So it is, maintaining our face and ensuring that it is not threatened is inherent to us as individuals and social beings, especially in our conversations with others. We are always protective of our face. And it was studied by, Irving Goffman, and then Brown and Levinson, as theorists, they all expounded on it. Now, even within face, there are two types of face. There's positive face, which is our desire to have our ideas and actions be approved by people who mean a lot to us. It stems from our innate desire to be liked, a positive image, to portray a positive image and to get positive feedback from people. It is focused on appreciation. Negative face, on the other hand, is the desire not to be impeded or constrained upon without any reason. So it is our desire to be autonomous. We like to believe that we are capable people who are able to take, decisions, and that desire to be respected and that desire to, that focus on autonomy is what is the basis of negative face. And we all have it. If you think about it, we all want to be respected as well as liked. So negative phase, or the desire for autonomy and respect, becomes very significant for a griever. And I'm going to talk about how, again, when I said earlier that it is a time when they're feeling particularly vulnerable, they're feeling like their world has changed, and they themselves have changed. And so they do not, they yet have that sense of, they want to be respected, and they want to regain that balance. And so how, a griever's face can be undermined in our support process. And this is something that we are trying to understand, the psychology, or the mindset of the griever. Grief is, of course, we all know, it's a misunderstood and difficult concept. It is not something that we are comfortable talking about. It can lead to unsolicited advice from others, which can directly undermine the griever's negative face need. So, because one is implying that the griever is incapable or incompetent to think or do things themselves. So, it is extremely important for us to be, as supporters, as someone who's providing the support, to know that it is very possible for a well-intended supportive message to quickly sound patronizing. And that is something to be mindful about, is to maintain the balance between not offering any support, which is, just being quiet or just disappearing, and offering too much, imposing a lot, giving advice, telling people what to do, trying to persuade them. That is how a griever's autonomy and negative face need can be undermined in grief. I wanted to shed light on, some quotations from our participants who I interviewed, about 30 of them, mostly adults, some young adults, and a couple of teenagers. So if you look at the quotations, some of it is referring to the kind of, again, the grieving person's thought process. So this bereaved spouse says, I'm always the kind of person, when I go through something, I like to be alone. I don't like people in my ear telling me what to do. I just needed to get through that and figure out how I was feeling, and think things through on my own. And then when I was around other people, I was trying not to cry, trying to keep it together, especially for the kids, trying to put on a brave face. My mind just couldn't comprehend it. And it's so bizarre for me because I'm never that person. I'm always the person that wants to deal with everything. Their sense of self has shifted. They cannot recognize themselves. This is right. I asked her a question about immediately after her spouse died. Then a bereaved parent said, uh, a very close friend kind of kicked me to the curb a little bit, which it would have been the last person I expected, who told me I just needed to pray more. She wrote me a rather terse letter. She hasn't reached out once. So this is again telling someone what to do, and you're overstepping. A bereaved child, who is also a young adult participant in Good Grief, said, I don't know why you would be uncomfortable. And she's referring to someone who's, a friend, a provider of support. And they told her that they were uncomfortable, which I understand, right? I don't want to, push the burden on the people, but also between you and me, I think I should be more uncomfortable than you. And so see how they say, I don't want to push the burden on the people, because, you know, a person, when they're grieving, and there are people around them offering support, they also don't want to burden anyone. So they feel like they'll be accountable to you, or they'll be beholden to you, they'll be grateful to you, indebted to you, all of that. They don't want to be that way. On top of that, if you're saying that you're uncomfortable, then it kind of creates a lot of anxiety and discomfort for this grieving person. And then we have another bereaved spouse telling me about a good way that someone offered support, and it also refers to her negative face need. He still continuously checks on me all the time about little things like, do you guys need anything? How is it going? And he doesn't do it like I'm not taking care of things. He does it more of a, are you okay? Just checking in, like what's happening. And she also said, I'm not a big one to ask for help. So it helps her to know that this person is not checking in because they feel like she's not doing well, but because I'm just checking in, and that helped. So now I wanted to go into, now that we have the stage set for understanding where a griever's mind is when they are in that situation, let's look at the basic structure of what happens in communication and what are the 4 factors that play a role in how a message lands. Why do we need to care for the other person's needs? So the 4 factors that impact communication are source, which is the person who's offering the communication. Who is it coming from? What are their qualities and capabilities? What are their thoughts about what influences communication? There's a context, which is where and how the message is being delivered. What is the setting like? Is it an online setting, a live setting, on the phone, via text, any of that? Is it a live interaction? Is it happening synchronously? Or is it asynchronous, that I send someone a text and they can send a reply to me any other time? It depends a lot on the message content. So what is being communicated? What is the content of that communication? As well as the recipient. So who is the recipient? What are their qualities and what are their thoughts? And how has grief impacted these? What are their needs and expectations from the communication? So when the source's qualities will determine the message content, and the recipient's qualities will determine how the message is received or interpreted. And for it to be an effective support process, both have to align in some way. The context plays its own role, but for now, let's just assume that we are in an in-person live communication scenario. So communication is driven by goals, whether we are aware of it or not. In any form with anyone, our communication has a goal, a purpose. It is not developed or expressed or interpreted for its own sake. It's not a medley of words, but it is intentional, it is purposeful. So right from the time, for instance, say when we are babies, we are communicating for a reason, whether it is to draw attention, whether it is to have our needs met, to convince someone. And then as we grow older, of course, to convince someone as we grow older, to express our beliefs, our attitudes, our emotions, so much more. So there's always a purpose for even small talk or friendly banter has a goal, which is to build and sustain those social relationships. So when we talk about goals have been decided as states of affairs that individuals desire to attain or maintain. And then communication researchers talk about message design as the product of reconciling multiple objectives. And let's hold on to that thought of reconciling multiple objectives, because that is something that happens in grief. Communication in general can have multiple goals. The same interaction can have multiple goals. And I have just listed a few that were developed by Dillard, but I urge you to think about other goals that any communication could have. So the ones that Dillard talked about are identity related, so acting consistently with one's beliefs, morals, and values. So to express those can be a communication goal. It can be a goal to express your relationship. So it can draw from or impact the relationship. So you're communicating because of the relationship, but you're also trying to better or impact the relationship in some way. Maybe you're trying to make it worse. Maybe you're fighting, and that's that is related to your relationship. Persuasive is convincing someone. Face related, that I talked about earlier, maintaining one's own and the other's face. So we do not want to come across as socially inappropriate, or we don't want to hurt the other person's autonomy. That can be a communication goal, definitely. It can be functional, which is just straightforward sharing of information and resources. And it can be also to manage our arousals. And by arousal, I mean, any kind of stimuli that make us anxious or nervous or stressful, stressed out, that kind of thing. And like I said, often the same interaction can have multiple goals. And how is that? Oh, sorry. Okay. So we are talking about having multiple goals, and that brings me to a complex situation. So a complex situation, according to communication theorists O'Keefe and Delia, they say that a situation is complex when it can create multiple relevant goals. So you have multiple goals in the same situation, your same communication, same message. There are significant obstacles to achieving those goals. They can be social obstacles. There can be, your own personal obstacles. It could be your interpersonal obstacle. It could be any obstacle. And there are actions. It's a situation where actions that can help accomplish you one goal can conflict with those that help you accomplish another goal. And they're both in the same situation. So we'll get into this in greater detail. Right now, it may seem abstract, but we'll get into the details, especially how it pertains to grief and the provision of support in grief. So Delia and O'Keefe and Delia also identified 3 strategies for managing multiple goals. So when people have multiple goals, whether they are aware of it or not, they use any of these 3, or sometimes more than one. Selection, which is giving priority to one over the other, so they can choose to suppress one goal and just focus on the other. They can do separation, which is temporarily just separating the 2 goals out. So you'd say something, at one time, and then maybe come back to the conversation with a different purpose, that kind of thing. Or your behavior shows, a lot of the times your nonverbal gestures and your tone of voice and all of that can be used to separate out your multiple goals. And again, we can talk about that. And then integration, which is redefining and reframing the situation, in a way that reduces the conflict between multiple goals. And O'Keefe and Delia argued that integration, where you're reframing and redefining the context, is the most focused on achieving multiple goals together, and is behaviorally most advanced and most complex. Now, how does that apply to grief as a situation? So it can have, grief can have multiple relevant goals for the provider of support. So we are now focusing on the provider, having thought about and learned about what the griever is going through, where they're coming from. Let's focus on what could be some relevant goals for the provider of support. So it could be relational. They just want to express care and concern for the griever. It could be functional, that they want to share resources with the griever. And again, mind you, all of these can be part of the same conversation, the same message, the same situation. It can be identity related, where they want to share what their beliefs and their values about the loss and its impact. It could be face related, where they want to maintain a positive image and come across as socially appropriate. It can be persuasive, where they, through their interaction with the griever, they're trying to influence the griever towards their own perception. So the provider's perception of wellness, because we are all different. And so we think we know what the other person's, perception of wellness is, but technically we are only aware of what our perception of wellness is. So we are trying to influence the griever. That can also be one of the goals of a provider of support. And how can so even within the provider, there can be, conflicting goals. So let's look at, like think about what O'Keefe and Delia said about a complex situation, generating actions that can help accomplish one goal. That's conflicting with actions that are helping accomplish another goal. So how can that happen in a grieving in a provision of support situation for a griever? So it can be a conflict between their relational goal and their persuasive goal. And what is the reason? What could be the reason? The support provider's attempt to influence the person can be detrimental to the relationship. It can, if someone's telling you what to do, even though you're really, fond of them and you have a strong relationship with them, you're still, it can cause a rift. Identity related versus face related. So support provider provides their beliefs and values, but it can also cause them to come across as socially inappropriate. There's functional versus face related. The support provider assumes that the griever needs a ton of resources, but just that assumption can make them feel presumptuous. So what could be, and even to make matters even more complex, now we have also conflict between the goals of the griever and the goals of the provider. So the griever might just want resources, while the provider of support wants to persuade them to think or act in a certain way. They want autonomy, they want to do things independently, while the support provider wants to honor their relationship and they feel, obliged to support because of the relationship. They want to be respected, while the supporter provides advice and tries to persuade. It can be that the griever wants to process their grief independently and make sense of it or not independently, while the support provider wants to share their beliefs and values. So those can be conflicting situations between the two, between the griever and the provider's goals in the same conversation. It can also be multiple conversations, but their interaction can have all these conflicts embedded. So I'm going to focus on integration. Remember, like selection, separation, and integration. But we are going to focus on integration as a technique to mitigate those conflicts. So, but O'Keefe and Delia said that integration is redefining and reframing the situation in a way that reduces conflict. So, what could be a possible message that mitigates the conflict between relational and persuasive? So if someone says, I know I'm worrying because I care for you, but this is all about you and not about my need to support you, please take your time about the therapist. So acknowledging one's own need to support indicates self-awareness, which is a good place to start. And then openly accepting that the griever is the priority. It's all about you. Also reframes the situation and builds trust. It tells the griever that they are who's calling the shot. They are primary in this situation. Between relational and face, I care for you and I'm there if and when you need me. That if and when is really important because it tells the griever that the person is valuing the relationship because they say, I care for you. But they're also recognizing that the griever may not need that person. So if and when you need me, I'm there. With functional, the resource sharing bit, I'm going to leave these resources for, again, if and when you need them. You're not assuming that they will need it, but it's there. The fact that you're respecting their autonomy is really important. Identity related versus face related. Identity is when you're trying to, share your beliefs, but someone says, my beliefs help me cope, but they don't have to mean anything to you. So accepting the discrepancy in the value of one's beliefs can mitigate that threat to one's face. So it means a lot to me, but it doesn't have to mean anything to you. So you're acknowledging the discrepancy. So now that we've kind of touched upon the psychological background of a griever's mind, and then we've talked about communication and the process of communication, let's dig a little deeper into what comprises supportive communication and what communication scholars and researchers are saying about supportive communication. So successful Brant Burleson, who's a very, one of the most well-recognized interpersonal communication scholar and theorists, has said that successful communicators must know how to generate and process messages in ways that enable them to accomplish their personal and social goals. Again, we are talking about the goals efficiently and effectively. Now, of course, we may all want to be great supporters, but not everyone is a skillful support provider. And I'm hoping that this presentation and will uncover some of those features that will help you be skillful support providers in whatever capacity you're doing that for a griever. Um, Comforting someone upset about a recent loss is a fairly complicated communicative task that requires, among other things, that we carefully consider the goals, traits, feelings, knowledge, and desires of our audience. Again, that focus on the recipient. And especially in a grief, in a situation that where you're offering support to a griever, the griever, focusing on them it becomes very important. That is something that we is important anyways, but especially in this situation, it becomes even more important. So prioritizing the other, so focusing on them, it's called person-centered communication, something that Dr. Burleson, that's his theory, that's his framework. So supportive messages are rated by how much they exhibit a person-centered approach. By person-centered, I mean the recipient-centered, to managing another person's emotional distress. The extent to which messages explicitly acknowledge, assist in elaborating, legitimize, and contextualize the distressed other's feelings. And we'll have examples of this. Person-centered communication it becomes of utmost importance when offering support to someone who's grieving. Again, remember that people do not want to be imposed upon, and yet they're feeling helpless and they're feeling vulnerable. And they are worried that, by asking for help, that whole situation is not comfortable for them. That whole situation of asking for and getting help, it's not comfortable on top of what they've been through. So it is very important for us to focus entirely on the other person. The griever's need, including their negative face need, that need for autonomy, that desire to be respected and not be imposed upon, is much more important than any need of the support provider. So that is something that we need to focus on, is that they are more important, their needs are more important. So let's talk about what what comprises, what is the spectrum of low person-centered message to a high person-centered message. And we'll talk about how that applies to grief as well. So a low person-centered message, it denies the other's feelings and perspectives by criticizing their legitimacy. It also challenges the legitimacy, and it tells the other person how he or she should act or feel. A moderate person-centered message, and this is an entire coding system that Dr. Burleson and his colleagues, and over the years it has been developed and redeveloped. They developed this coding system for supportive person-centered communication in various different circumstances, including grief, and we'll talk about his studies on grief. But moderate person-centered message, which kind of falls in the middle, it implicitly recognizes the other person's distress, but it also tries to distract them, their attention from the situation. It offers expressions of sympathy and condolence, often, a little bit of a scripted, a little bit of a non-feeling type of a sympathy. And then it also presents explanations of the situation that are intended to reduce. So it gives kind of more of an explanation, like this is why it might have happened. Then high person-centered messages, they explicitly recognize and legitimize the other's feelings by helping them articulate it even more. So it invites more sharing from the griever in a grieving situation, in any kind of challenging situation. Elaborates on the reasons why those feelings might be felt. And then it also explores how those feelings fit in a broader context. So again, it's not like all high person-centered messages have all these features. And again, it is important to have at least one feature to be considered a low person-centered message, a moderate, or a high person-centered message. But these are some of the qualities that researchers have found have been seen as high person-centered message. So communication researchers have been researching grieving individuals' perception of helpful and unhelpful communication for a long time. So even in the 80s, these two studies that were done, they asked people to, grieving individuals to rate helpful and unhelpful communication. And they saw that of the received responses, 80% were regarded as unhelpful and only 20% as helpful. And the most to least helpful categories of statements were feeling focused. And you will see that there is a kind of focus on how person-centeredness is being conceptualized, even way back in before it was formally conceptualized as a theoretical framework. So feeling focused is most to least. Feeling focused, clarification, so asking for clarification, summary, asking questions, then reassurance of support. Then again, we are moving towards low, least helpful. Now, interpretation, analysis, you're providing an analysis, and then advice or evaluation. That is the least helpful. This was the 84 study. Expressing concern for the welfare of the bereaved, offering presence, and providing the opportunity for the bereaved to ventilate feelings were among the strategies rated most helpful. Minimizing their feelings, giving unsolicited advice were rated as least helpful. So, person-centered communication with a griever. So, consistently, communication researchers were finding that bereaved individuals, there was a consistency in their findings across the age, all other demographic of bereaved individuals. Their evaluation of helpful and unhelpful communication of support was fairly consistent, but there was nothing that was informing us as to why. Why is it that that this is helpful and that is not? And so person-centeredness as a framework could explain why. So for instance, these are three examples of someone talking to someone who's grieving. So the message is, you can't let something like this get to you. You have to get on with your own life and not take this so hard. Just stay busy. What are the qualities of what is happening during this conversation? This person dismisses the other's feelings. You can't let something like this get to you. Do not take this so hard. Tells the other what to do. Just stay busy. a moderate person-centered message. This person says, there is a purpose for everything, even if you don't see it at the time. He was a really good person and is no longer suffering. Why don't you join us for dinner tonight? So, what is this message doing? It offers an explanation of the situation that is fairly intended to reduce distress, but it's also very impersonal. It's mostly like he was a good person, they're not no longer suffering. And then they're trying to distract. Why don't you join us for dinner tonight? Let's focus on something else. A high person centered message. I am so sorry. I can only guess how sad you must feel about his passing. I know the two of you were very close. I really care about you and I'm available anytime you want to talk about things or just want company. Times like this can be rough and I'm here to listen. So this person legitimizes the other's feelings. They are saying that it is absolutely justified for you to feel this way, this sad. They elaborate on why those feelings are legitimate. I know that you were too close. You were very close. You two were very close. And then, of course, they are reassuring of support. I'm available anytime you want to talk about things or just want company. So again, not imposing, but just saying that they are available. Times like this can be rough. So at least, again, contextualizing it, making it a broader, situating it in a broader context that makes, that makes sense of a fairly senseless, meaningless situation. Times like this can be rough. I am there. So these are two studies that Burleson and his colleagues at Purdue University, the same research teams, did in 2007 and 2008, where they studied, where they asked young adult grievers, people who had lost someone close to them in the previous 2 years, and then adolescents. These are two separate studies. One was done in 2007 and the other one in 2008. So 114 adolescents who had lost someone important to them in the previous 2 years were asked to rate messages on their, on the level of helpfulness, and it was rated on a Likert scale on a scale of 7, and for the first study. So I'm going to just go over the most helpful, the statements or the supportive messages that were rated most helpful, or messages that offered presence, being there. It scored, most 5.92 on 7. Express willingness to listen, 5.75 on 7. Express care and concern, 5.68. And include in social activities, 4.92. What were least? What scored the least? Give advice, minimize feelings, and forced cheerfulness, 3.10 and 1.98. And then they repeated the study, the entire research on 105 young adults. And again, offer presence rated the highest. This time the score was on, the Likert scale was 5 points. Express willingness to listen, express care and concern. They also added this one statement about complimenting the bereaved person. You were there for him. You were always helpful. I could see how much you valued this person who died. It was done to enhance the face of the bereaved, the positive face. So it was they complimented the bereaved. That was rated 3.60 on 5. And then compliment the deceased was 3.70 on 5. And again, the same giving advice, minimizing feelings, forced cheerfulness was rated the least. It was 2.18 and 1.45 on 5. So this was, let's look at some evidence. This is research done at a university, and my interviews with participants. Let's look at what they say about support. So bereaved spouse says, you don't have to say anything, but just be there. Just show up. Just, whatever. Tell stories, whatever you have to. A bereaved child, also a young adult, says, and then sometimes people didn't want to bring it up because they didn't want to make me upset or whatever. But I feel that that just made me feel more alone and stuff. A bereaved parent said, people say things that are very awkward only because they're trying to be helpful and trying to be positive. But I would say that was kind of a big revelation for me. Things that people do and say that the intention is good, but it doesn't help. Like, certainly, when people say, she would want you to be happy, or she would want you to go on. This person had lost their daughter. I don't know why that one always kind of ticked me off. So again, trying to provide that explanation and telling people how to think, how to interpret this. A bereaved caregiver, as you know, we have caregiver groups where it could be a grandparent, an aunt or uncle, or any community member who is caring for a child who has lost a parent or a sibling. So a bereaved caregiver said, sometimes people put up their shield and don't really want to talk about things or understand it better. But I think from a child's perspective, who did not know her mom, who died, talking about it and understanding more of it and keeping it at a comfort level where you don't have to be secretive about it has definitely helped her cope better as she's growing up. But people just don't know what to say. So what you also see here is that the grieving person has an awareness that people have the best intentions. So we are not holding anyone accountable, or we are not saying someone is a bad person for not knowing what to say or saying the wrong thing. We are aware that they come to us with the best of intentions. We always give them the benefit of the doubt. However, what I was saying earlier and throughout the presentation, the focus should be on the griever. And so those shortcomings or those limitations on our part have to be on us to process and rectify and modify. It should not be on the griever's perspective to make sense of it and to contextualize it and to give, to interpret it in a way that helps them settle with it and be comfortable with it and yet continue the relationship. We should be the person giving the support here, and they should not, but they're aware of it. And this is something that I have seen in my own life as well. Is I've always given so much grace and so much patience to people who were saying the most unhelpful things, because I knew that they truly meant good, and that they just did not know how to say something, or even the fact that they could say something. Um, but increasingly, it kind of started becoming almost like a burden on me to settle down and say, okay, I'm fine. This is fine. Yeah, they mean well. And increasingly, I started kind of self-advocating and opposing people and telling people that um, I'm not comfortable with this, but not everyone can do that. And at Good Grief, we are big on self-advocacy and speaking about your needs, but not everyone is able to do that well. So it's when we come to a situation where we are offering support to someone who's grieving, we should understand their mind, where they're coming from. Again, what I was saying earlier about their negative face need, they have a ton of needs. I focused on the negative phase needs because that is something that becomes especially salient in a grieving situation, because there's that need to support, but there's also the griever's need to be respected. It's important for us to understand the multiple goals that one might have. and I have been talking about the key takeaways before I clicked on the to come to the slide. So what I just said about people do not like to feel incapable, even and especially when someone important has died, because they are already functioning in a different way and their self-awareness is shifting um, at that moment. It is important to remember to not come across as patronizing. All communication has goals. Communication around grief has several goals. Some of them may even conflict with each other. Person-centered communication is of utmost importance when offering support to a griever. And the griever's need, including their negative face need, is more important than any need of the support provider. And then the features of high person-centered, moderate person-centered, and low person-centered messages. Acknowledge, assist in elaborating, legitimize, and contextualize others' feelings. And if for some reason you're producing a message that is a low person-centered message or a moderate person-centered message, I would urge you to be cognizant of that and to modify that in your ongoing conversation. It's not the end of the world if you say something that is not helpful, but it could be difficult if you continue in that space. So it's always possible to say sorry or just, reframe the situation, explain why you did what you did, and then help them cope and help them and, continue your support. So that leaves me with 3 minutes of questions. Thank you so much again. I come to you with immense gratitude. Um, I'm so happy that I could share some of my research and my personal experience with you all. And please get in touch if you have any follow-up questions that I cannot get to now. Please feel free to email me or Annette, and we'll answer them.
Yeah, thank you. First, I just want to say thank you so much. For those of you who are in the chat asking about the recording, you will absolutely get a copy of the recording as well as any slides that Dr. Sen has or any resources that she has for you all. Again, if you're anything like me, sometimes your questions come to you afterwards. So if you have any questions, I put Dr. Sen's email in the webinar chat. And I want to thank you both as a colleague and as someone who is currently grieving. This was amazing. This really helped kind of put things into perspective and not be so upset or hung up on what someone says to you, and really see that that's the reason why we do the work that we do, right? To make sure that others are more grief informed. But we are
Yeah.
human, right? So thank you all so much for being with us.
I just wanted to end with just one thing. There's no scripted perfect communication. Even a high person-centered communication is not like you're reading from a script.
Mm-hmm.
And a low person-centered is not like, okay, you don't care, so you're just, it's there is no communication scholar ever has come up with a perfect communication, template.
Right.
So you have to give yourself grace and know that you're trying your best, but just to be aware of these features of what is helpful and what is not
Right.
can help you craft those messages. And again, if you happen to say something that is not helpful, it's always possible to take a step back and redeem yourself and just say, I'm
Absolutely,
sorry.
absolutely. We're all learning. This is all
Yes.
new territory, I think. And I also believe that if we come from a place of, compassion and empathy, like we're always trying to do here at Good Grief, it makes it a little easier to swallow, I guess is the best way to say it.
Yeah.
But thank you all again. I want to give you back your day. It is now 1 o'clock. Like I said prior, you will get a recording. Please be on the lookout for upcoming webinars. Next month, we have Kelly Cervantes coming to join us. We are immensely grateful for her. She's doing a webinar for us pro bono. She's a huge supporter of Good Grief. So please, please, please look out for the email for that. And with that, I'll say goodbye to everyone and have
Goodbye.
a
Have a great
Thursday
rest of
and
your day.
Mritika, I'll see you in a few minutes downstairs. Bye-bye,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.